everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Cecil Chick, and I use female pronouns she, her, and hers. Thank you for joining the first Titan Table Talk, brought to you by the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, Equity Programs in partnership with Alumni Engagement and Government Relations. Tonight, our panelists will be engaging in a dialogue focused on voter education in the Latinx communities with the help of our moderator, Dr. Rob Castro. Before we get started with the program, I wanted to provide some Zoom housekeeping information. In case you haven't noticed, we are utilizing the Zoom webinar function. So you are muted and the cameras will be off. If you wish to engage with panelists asking any questions for follow-up or during the Q&A section, please feel free to use the Q&A tab in the bottom that you can find in the menu in the bottom of your screen. Other things, this dialogue will be recorded tonight and will be posted with closed captioning on the Titan TV YouTube channel for everyone to enjoy in the future. And finally, at the end of this program, there will be a feedback form for you to provide any suggestions or on topics moving forward. So if you can please fill out that evaluation, that'd be greatly appreciated. And then last but not least, if you enjoy tonight's dialogue, we will be hosting another Titan Table Talk on October 15th at 5:30 p.m. To celebrate LGBTQ+ History Month. And the topic for that evening will be LGBTQ+ history of civic engagement, social justice, and advocacy. So to kick off our event tonight, I'd like to introduce the president of Cal State Fullerton, Virjee, to provide some welcome remarks. Thank you so much, President Virjee, for joining us tonight.
Well, thanks, Cecil. It's great to be here. It's great to see your face. I always loved, seeing your smile, and I hate seeing it virtually, but at least I get to see it. That's terrific. Good evening, everybody, and happy Latinx Heritage Month, and welcome to Titan Table Talks, voter education in the Latinx community. You know, I was thinking about this a year ago now. We were celebrating this event with an on-campus block party, and it was really, really, really fun. And today, most of us aren't even allowed on campus. We certainly can't gather for a party. And according to Julie, I can't even leave to our block, let alone be on a party. So I'll open with a bad joke, I know, but I don't want to make light of a situation, but it reminds us that despite the format, the change in the format and the seriousness of the topic we are here to discuss, this is still a celebration of sorts. We are celebrating Latinx Heritage Month. We should love, laugh, spread joy and honor of the Latinx Heritage Month celebration just as much as we should learn and engage and empathize and grow with what today's speakers and participants are going to talk about. Now, I am the first, I will tell you, the very first to admit that a face-to-face meeting is preferable to a Zoom session. I keep telling everybody I'm going to be inappropriate. My butt is getting fatter and flatter because all I do is sit on these Zoom calls all the day. But I know what we're all going through. We have our own adversity, not only with the pandemic, but also with the social injustice plague that's happening around the nation, that things have bubbled up that we knew were there, and now we're having to deal with them. I will say that it's not all the changes that have happened since our block party together last year are bad. There's good news here. For starters, we just admitted the largest number of Latinx students in our history, marking a 32% increase in Latinx students in the last 5 years alone. In May, more Latinx students earned their Titan degree than ever before. More Latinx women earned their bachelor's degree and master's degree at Cal State Fullerton than ever before. More Latinx men earned their bachelor's degree than ever before. An amazing statistic, we facilitated a 41% increase in Latinx tenure track faculty since 2012, including a tremendous, absolutely tremendous new class of tenure track faculty this year that is nearly 40% Latinx. So we are ranked #1 in the state and #2 in the nation for conferring bachelor's degrees to Latinx students. Just last week, Joe Castro became the first Mexican-American appointed chancellor in the CSU system, and he will do an amazing job. And we at Cal State Fullerton hired one of our own, Dr. Toni Oseguera, as our own vice president for student affairs, she's amazing, and I'm so glad she's on our team. And finally, in June, I know that seems like an eon ago, but it was just a couple of months ago, our collective advocacy in support of our DACA students contributed to the Supreme Court's decision to uphold the challenge to the White House's attempt to discontinue the program. Now, look, I know the fight continues in many, many areas, especially the fight against dismantling DACA. But we are on that fight. We are in that fight at every level, most importantly in support of our DACA and our undocumented Titans. So 2020 has not been easy for anyone, that is for sure. But in the midst of so much adversity, it's important to shine a light on some positive things that we have created. We, the Cal State Fullerton community, have created, especially as we celebrate our Cultural Heritage Months, and this month is Latinx Cultural Heritage Month. At the same time, we have to be equally vigilant, vigilant to recognize the fact that historically underrepresented communities continue to bear the brunt of the pain and the inequity and the social injustice in our nation. Let me say that again, because it bears repeating. We must recognize that the fact that our historically underrepresented communities continue to bear the brunt of the pain, inequity, and social justice in our nation. From COVID deaths to voter suppression, from redlining still going on to healthcare disparities, from access to mental health to economic discrimination, from discriminatory policing to unequal access to quality education, and the list goes on. And while we often tout, and I often tout, education as the preeminent antidote to injustice and inequities, there's another solution that can be just as powerful and just as liberating. That's voting. Voting is not only a civic duty, it is a sacred duty. Voting doesn't just matter when things are close, it always matters. Voting is not just a right, it is an obligation. As many of you know, I'm an immigrant to this country. Most of you don't know that my dad passed away last week at the age of 89. He lived in this country for 60 years, but he never became a citizen. He never undertook the civic duty that each of us should to hold our leaders accountable. Not just to complain about social justice, but to do something about it. Not just to protest inequitable access to healthcare and education, but take action to change it. Not just to wring our hands about injustice, inhumanity, dehumanization occurring at our borders, but to hold those in charge accountable. My dad was old school. Well, you know, since he was 89 and he never went to college, I don't know if old school is exactly the right word or a complete mischaracterization. But when I would ask him why he didn't seek his citizenship, why he didn't vote, he really had no reason other than he felt intimidated. He wasn't sure how to become a citizen. He wasn't sure they would let him become a citizen. He wasn't sure he deserved to become a citizen. But let me tell you something very strange. His reluctance became my motivation. His reservation became my resolve. His hesitation became my single-minded intentionality. So in 1978, when I turned 18, yeah, now you know exactly how old I am, and was able to vote for the very first time, I was bound and determined that I would vote in my first election, not just for me, but for my father as well. I was resolute that I would use my vote, my voice, to support those who were voiceless, who were not being heard. I was resolved to exercise my right, my privilege, my obligation to vote. You see, if you can vote and you don't, then you deserve what you get. If you have the right to vote, but you fail to exercise it, you actually have no legitimate voice in complaining about what comes next. And so I'm proud to say that since I voted that very first time as a freshman in college, I have voted in each election when I've been able to do so. Now, I will tell you that my candidates did not always win. In fact, my candidates and causes likely lost as much as they won, or maybe more. But by exercising my right to vote, my obligation to vote, I also gained the right to have a voice to complain about the outcome, to push for change. And Lord knows over the last 4 years, I've used that voice a lot. And that is a bit of what we want to talk about tonight. Did you know that not even 15% of eligible college students voted in the 2016 election? Less than 15%. But did you know that at Cal State Fullerton, we have been working very hard ever since to correct that calamity through a variety of voter registration initiatives and programs. More than that, we are doing so with the goal of correct the injustice in our nation that has perpetuated for centuries. The systemic obstruction of the right to vote for marginalized communities. It is happening today. This is a historic problem, to be sure, but due to the pandemic and some recent voter suppression moves that are unorthodox at best and illegal at worst, it is a problem that is getting worse, not better. We at Cal State Fullerton, we aim to be a solution to that problem, an antidote not only to our communities, but to all communities, to show the world that Titans not only turn out on election day, but we turn out to correct inequities that have long plagued the polls around our state and around our nation. To not just advocate for campus-wide voter registration and voting, but to promote informed voting and voter rights. So much of that begins right here as we highlight Latinx voices to better understand their lived experiences, specifically as it relates to voting and voter education. And I am so proud to be here, not just as your president, but as a participant, to listen and learn from this tremendous panel and from all of you. So with that in mind, I first want to thank Dr. Castro. Rob, thank you. Professor of Politics, Administration, and Justice at Cal State Fullerton, for being our moderator. I so appreciate it. I also want to welcome and thank our panelists, Helen Torres, Toni Castro-Graham, Edgar, Zazueta, and Diana Victoria Coronado. And finally, I want to thank all of you for being here and being engaged in this critical conversation at this critical time in our nation's history. I'm honored to be here with you. And while I look forward to the day when we're all back together on campus in person, we can have another one of those block parties, I'm pleased we can be here virtually and grateful to the Titans that made this possible. So thank you for that. And I'll give the floor back to Cecil, or I guess I should say the screen back to Cecil to get us started.
Thank you so much, President Virjee, for sharing those words. We really appreciate you starting this debate with us, and also the words that you kind of provided serve as a foundation for our dialogue tonight. So before we begin with introducing the moderator, I noticed that we had some more folks join. I just want to remind folks that we are using a Zoom webinar format. So you will be able to engage with our participants, with our panelists tonight through the Q&A function at the bottom of the menu. So if you have any questions or have any follow-up questions, please feel free to use the Q&A format. So to officially kick things off, I want to introduce our moderator tonight. So Dr. Rob Castro is a professor in the Division of Politics, Administration, and Justice here at Cal State Fullerton. He holds a BA in Criminology, Law, and Society from UC Irvine, a PhD in Political Science from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and a JD from the UCLA Law School, a School of Law, where he was in the inaugural class for the program in Public Interest Law and Policy, where he also served as the editor-in-chief of the Chicana Latina Law Review. His work focuses on immigration law and policy, refugee and human rights law, immigration and the US-Mexico border, as well as ethnic politics, public interest law, and advocacy. We are delighted to have him serve as our moderator tonight. So without further ado, everybody, please welcome Dr. Rob Castro.
Hi. Thank you, Cecil, so much for a kind introduction. Good evening. My name is Rob Castro, Professor of Politics, Administration, and Justice here at the California State University, Fullerton. I want to thank and welcome the audience, certainly, for carving time out of your schedules to join us tonight. The president of our university for such inspirational words, and certainly our panelists. And that's a distinct honor that I have to introduce each of our panelists this evening. The first is Helen Torres, who's the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of Hispanas Organized for Political Equality, or HOPE. So HOPE has been instrumental in the development and implementation of a leadership institute, the HOPE Leadership Institute, HLI, and that they sponsor programs in order to assist Latinas to come up to the next level for civic participation. HLI has aided 180 Latinas being appointed to state and local commissions, and 200 Latinas on nonprofit boards to improve local communities. She also created the Hope Binational Fellowship, which is an executive leadership program for Latinas in both the US and Mexico, and that was intended to help increase the competence, or rather their competence in national and global economic as well as security issues. So welcome, Helen, this evening. Next is Antonia Toni Castro-Graham, who's the Deputy City Manager at the City of Fullerton. So Antonia has 17 years of extensive public administration, legislative affairs experience, telecommunications, experience in homelessness response, energy and sustainability, grant administration, as well as economic development. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science and American studies from here, Cal State Fullerton, a MPA with a concentration in public finance from Cal State Fullerton, and also a master's degree in sustainability from Arizona State University. Next, we have Edgar Zazueta, also a Cal State Fullerton alum. He is the Senior Director of Policy and Government Relations for the Association of California School Administrators, ACSA. He leads the policy advocacy and political engagement efforts for ACSA. Now, prior to joining ACSA, Edgar was Chief of External Affairs for the LAUSD, and in this capacity, Edgar represented the Superintendent and Board of Education before several different types of community organizations and led legislative advocacy efforts at the federal, state, and local levels of government. Finally, we have Diana Victoria Coronado, Vice President at the Building Industry Association of Southern California, the LA and Ventura County chapters. She also is a Cal State Fullerton alum. She oversees, in her work, she oversees her chapters of government affairs, membership, and events. Her work focuses on lobbying and advocating for housing, residential building, and development throughout both Los Angeles and Ventura counties. She sits on the Cal State Fullerton Alumni Board of Directors, as well as the Cal State University DC Scholars Board. She has served as legislative director and in-house lobbyist for the Association of California Cities, and she was legislative director at the State Assembly in Sacramento. So all of you, welcome. I'm honored to have you here. So let's start. I wanted to begin tonight's chat by reviewing some key facts regarding the US Latino population. And these are actually figures from the Pew Research Center. So the US population, the US Latino population as of 2019 is 60.6 million people. There are three major groups within the US Latino population, Mexican American being the largest, Puerto Riqueño, and Cubano. 41 of US Latino adults, age 25 and older, have had some college. The share of Latinos in the US that speak the English language proficiently is growing. 71%, ages 5 and up, now speak English proficiently, while Spanish use in the home has progressively. Mexican origin people, approximately 37 million people, comprise of the US Latino population. However, the fastest growing segment amongst US Latinos is from the following nations: Venezuela, the Dominican Republic, Guatemala, and Honduras. 4/5 of Latinos are US citizens. That's approximately 80% Latinos living in the US. Now, growth in the US Latino population is now being driven birth rate rather than through immigration. 5 states are home to 2/3 of Latinos. You can probably guess which ones those are: California, Texas, Florida, New York, and Arizona. 32 million Latinos will be eligible to vote in 2020, up from 27.3 million in 2016, and 1/4 of Latino voters are naturalized citizens. In the 2016 presidential election, 29% of Latinos voted for President Trump. Approximately 65% of US Latino voters voted for Hillary Clinton. Tremendous as they are, tremendous as these numbers are, they belie a much more complicated story. Latino, it's an umbrella term. It's typically used to describe mixed blood groups, some mixture between Spanish and indigenous blood and culture. It's used to describe a diverse set of communities who, while having strong connections to Roman Catholicism and the Spanish language, are actually quite distinct in their respective histories, cultures, and ancestral lines. When you begin to drill down, it quickly becomes very complicated. Take, for example, Mexican Americans. The Mexican origin people have been in the Southwest for hundreds of years before the Southwest was even part of the United States. Think places like the San Luis Valley in New Mexico. That's the valley in northern New Mexico that connects to southern Colorado. Mexican origin people in that area have been there so long that they've intermingled with the local Indian tribes, Comanche, Navajo, and Pueblo. So much so that, in fact, their DNA frequencies indicate that they more resemble an indigenous population than they do a European one, making them akin to something like detribalized Indian nations. Yet they self-identify as being Latino or Mexican American. When you get further into the weeds, it gets even more complex, because large numbers of undocumented Latinos tend to live within or in close proximity to domestic Latino populations. Diverse and complicated set of dynamics. Here are today's questions to get us started. So some of the top policy and political issues for US Latinos in the upcoming 2020 elections are the following. Employment. Folks are concerned about things like job loss. Healthcare. Access and affordability are at the very top of many people's lists. Immigration. Comprehensive immigration reform. And folks are worried about the inhumane treatment of Latino immigrants. Education. high dropout rates, and access to higher education are predominant issues. And of course, police reform. The desire to build safer communities and to lessen the number of deadly encounters between the police and young men of color. Of course, all of these issues being skewed, being amplified, and have become more predictable as a result of COVID-19. So I'd like to begin tonight by asking you, which issue or issues do you think will be most decisive for US Latinos in the 2020 elections, and why? Helen, you want to take a crack at this?
Happy to, and thank you, Rob, for that very insightful background. You're right, it is complicated when you define yourself as Latina or Latino or Hispanic or whatever term that you want to use, but at the end of the day, we do have some common threads that really bring us together, right? And one of those is what's important for us in this election. Overwhelmingly, what we're seeing in a lot of polling is the impact that COVID-19 is having in our communities, both from an economic standpoint as well as a healthcare access standpoint. So economic, let's tackle that first. We know that in California alone, 30% of Latinas lost their jobs in the first 3 months of COVID-19. 40% of Latinas who were undocumented lost their jobs. That's an incredible amount of loss of wages and economic prosperity in our community. We also know from looking back at the recession in 2008 that it takes Latinas and Latinos double amount of time for recovery, because where we diversify our income, it's really literally most of our dollars are either in our income and our houses, where other communities have much more diverse portfolios, including inheritance, including business ownership, as well as the ability to make money through the stock market, which we don't have that diversification at a high level in our community. So COVID-19's impact, it's going to be felt in our community much longer than in others because of that. The other thing that it really showed was that quality access to quality healthcare is still a major barrier in our community. We saw an incredible drop of uninsured individuals getting insurance for the first time through the Affordable Care Act. We're talking double digits. But as that reform started getting shaped by federal new laws and is going to be up again for debate in the Supreme Court, that's going to be most likely reversed. So access to quality healthcare is something that we're constantly hearing that Latinos are concerned about, because COVID-19 once again exposed when the country gets a little ill, Latinos get very ill. And the recovery from that is very difficult. So that's what's on top of mind from the Latina and Latino voters that we're talking to. It's an incredible, important election to really ensure that our leaders are being responsive to our economic and to our health issues and concerns.
Diana, what do you see as being the top issues here for US Latinos in the upcoming 2020 elections?
Hi, thank you so much, Rob. I really appreciate you that opening as well. And I think Helen is right on target. I mean, it's definitely economy, jobs, and healthcare. As Helen already demonstrated, Latino population is disproportionately affected on all of these levels. So it makes sense that we would care about these issues when voting in the election. I know Helen already put out some numbers, but on average, Latinas are paid 46% less than white males and 31% less than their white female counterparts. And that's just during good economic times. I can't imagine during the recession times that we're going into now. And in addition to that, healthcare access is so important. If you watched the governor's press conference this morning, there was a question posed to him. You know, California is very progressive in providing healthcare and Medi-Cal and trying to increase that net for folks, especially the Latino community and undocumented community. But with the money that we have in the budget that's been reduced so significantly, how as a state are we going to continue those efforts? And then obviously on the federal level, how is that going to backfill anything that we're losing at the state level? And that's just on healthcare and jobs. Obviously, we've seen a huge decrease in jobs. And I think between COVID and everything that's happened, I believe that it's between the Black community and the Hispanic community, 55% of those affected by COVID make up those populations of people. So I can't echo enough what Helen said on jobs, the economy, and healthcare.
Antonia, the key cities here in Orange County, our home city, the city within which Cal State Fullerton sits. How anticipate police reform figures into the U.S. Latino electorate? There's certainly so many tragic and high-profile incidents that have taken place over recent months. What do you see in terms of, or what do you think in terms of this desire to build safer communities, but also to ensure that there are trustworthy relations between the police and the communities that they serve? I think there's a real desire to lessen the number of deadly encounters that have been occurring. So what do you think, or what do you think police reform figures into that for U.S. Latino electorate?
I think at the end of the day, Latinas and Latinos really talk about what I like to call kitchen table topics. What is important to them? What do they talk about around the kitchen table? And it's the safety of their families, the safety of their children. It's having an economy that works for them, and an economy, a sustainable economy that has economic opportunity for everyone and has equal and affordable access to healthcare and education. These are things I think people talk about the kitchen table and what matters to them as voters. So safety, obviously, people want to live in a safe community, and they want to make sure that the law enforcement that serves their community is a partner with them. And I know in the cities that I've worked in, and including the city of Fullerton, we do an excellent job of really partnering with the community. We have a Chiefs Advisory Council in the city of Fullerton, and we recently just finished a Spanish Citizens Academy, and it was well attended, and we plan to do more to really engage the Spanish-speaking community in the city of Fullerton. So I think these things are really important, and if these kitchen table topics are really what I think are important to voters, especially in our community, of what's important to them is education, safety, and economic opportunity, and access to education and healthcare. And, all of those things combined are really important issues that they vote on.
Okay, thank you so much. So next question. Many young, we're here, at least virtually, at Cal State Fullerton. Many young Latinx people, oftentimes university age, are agnostic when it comes to voting, meaning that they're completely uninterested in the efficacy of voting. What is your best argument regarding why they should vote in the upcoming 2020 elections? I know that in his opening remarks, the president nailed one real clearly. Look, if you have no moral authority to complain if you don't vote, right? But what's your best argument as to why the Latinx generation folks should vote in the upcoming 2020 elections? And I'm going to begin with Edgar on this one.
Thank you, Dr. Castro. Appreciate the opening, and just excited to be part of a Fullerton event and be on a panel with four pretty awesome Latinas. I have to say, just in general, just when we talk about the movement, whether it be voter education or every movement, I mean, from education to now what we see in the public sector and in private sector. I mean, I think Latinas in many ways are helping us lead the way as a community. So just fortunate to be part of this conversation. I think your question in terms of why folks should be interested, especially young folks should be interested. It was interesting listening to President Virjee. And I almost got fired up, and I was like, okay, I want to go vote, and I want to go vote again, right? And it reminded me.
Only vote once.
I know. I shouldn't make that joke because some of our officials will get us into trouble there, right? But it reminded me of what motivated me as a young person, and he talks about he couldn't wait to vote, and that, you know, and for me it was, I remember distinctly 1994. I was a freshman in high school. It was Prop 187 here in California. And for me, I could not wait to turn 18, which happened 4 years later. But I told myself, because at the time, for those that may not remember, we just celebrated the anniversary of Prop 187. It was really this initiative that for us in the community really felt that, hey, they were targeting us. They were targeting our parents. They were targeting our community in terms of cracking down on services or perceived benefits if you're undocumented. And so I remember really feeling like that, this is what we need to all wake up. And I was part of walkouts. You know, I didn't know anything. I was a 14-year-old kid, knew enough that we had to do something, right? And for every election thereafter, as soon as I was 18, that was my motivating factor. And so I think now, like, what is the issues of the day? And obviously we joke about 2020, but from racial injustice to obviously, like the panelists all talked about the impact of COVID. And if this is not a motivation to go out and do something, I'm not sure what is. I mean, if we look at COVID, for example, and the equity issues that that presented, I think the panelists talked about, you know, from the impact, and you talked about it, Rob, in terms of the impact, the disproportionate impact that it's having on the Latino community. My lens is education, so I look at it from every aspect from that point. So if you look at it, not only are Latinos the most likely to get COVID and to be impacted and to be hospitalized, or one of the most impacted communities, to now what we're seeing as we're trying to struggle through this, where are the communities that are the least likely to open up their schools? Those are also the communities with higher percentages of Latino students, right? As the state is now grappling with, you know, rates and where can we open up school? I mean, and that's something we're seeing across the country. So just from any aspect, from healthcare to jobs to education, and again, the undercurrent of just these conversations that we've been having about racial injustice. In the wake of the George Floyd incident and killing, we every organization, I'm sure every organization that we're part of, everybody struggled to, well, like, let's go and put out the right statement, right? And one of the things I was really sensitive to is, like, it has to go beyond those words. Like, what is it that we're going to do in action? And I think from a very practical standpoint,
okay,
that is the fundamental piece that we do.
I think we're going to revisit that question because, Edgar, you raised the issue of racial justice. And I think that that's a very important issue. And so let me transition to the next question. This is a provocative question, folks. So I came across an article a couple of days ago by an author named Julio Varela, and I realized you haven't read it, so I'm going to describe it to you. Essentially, it boiled down to this, that the president's border wall proposal, both figuratively and literally, was never just about national security, but it was meant to remind all Latinos that they are not welcome, and that this can have, and the consequence can have harmful results because it normalizes hostility against all Latinos. Example, August 2019, El Paso, Texas. 21-year-old Patrick Crucius drove 11 hours through Texas deliberately to kill Latinos at the El Paso Walmart, and in fact did kill 22 people, garnering both state homicide charges against him and federal hate crimes charges against him. His motivation? To stop the Hispanic invasion of Texas. Facts. Where El Paso is located, there was just as much chance that the shooter would encounter US-born Latinos as he would Mexican nationals who had crossed over and happened to have been shopping on the US side on that day. But he killed people indiscriminately. So the author of this article makes the point that there is a linkage between acts of hate like the El Paso shooting and the heated political rhetoric from Washington that has normalized hostility against Latinos. So I have two mini questions here. First one, is the linkage between the heated rhetoric and harmful consequences, do you see that as being a credible issue for US Latino voters? I can certainly give you a moment to think about that.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. This is Helen. It's interesting you pose the question as a credible issue. It absolutely is a credible issue. Is it top of mind every day for the majority of Latinos? I'm not quite sure. So would it go to another question you asked, to motivate higher participation? I would hope so, but we haven't seen that rise up in the conversations that we're having in the focus groups. Should it be? Absolutely. You know, I run a leadership organization, and at the core is to always remind people that leadership matters. How you show up, how you discuss your plans for the future, it matters. And what this president has done was, I would characterize it, provide a venue, a platform for the worst of individuals who are bigoted, racist individuals to feel at home in the United States. And he knows predominantly not all his base, but he knows that he does speak to that base of individuals very strongly.
So let me just interject here. I think some of the prevailing discussions that I have been privy to are that messages like that, and maybe this is just saying the same thing that you just said, but messages like that tend to fall on the ears of people that aren't interested in discriminating between Latino citizens and undocumented people. And here's a little bit of context, and this is drawn from the political science literature. A guy named Matt Barado, then formerly at the University of Washington, now at UCLA, and Gary Segura, formerly at Stanford, now a dean at UCLA, they did some survey research back in 2014, and they asked a really large sample of self-identified white respondents in that survey, what percentage of Latinos are undocumented? And 2/3 of all respondents answered all Latinos are undocumented or illegal aliens, which is extraordinarily striking. Antonia and Diana, whoever wants to pipe in, imagine that you are speaking with a colleague or a friend, non-Latino. How do you explain to them in a way that they understand about why heated rhetoric like this, particularly that's been leveled against Latino immigrants, may have disastrous consequences for all Latinos, even US-born Latinos? How do you explain that?
I think the best explanation could be that this heated rhetoric riles up the worst in society and lumps together, you know, all Latinos. And so to the point where this angry person, so to speak, who's been riled up by this rhetoric, lumps all of us together and doesn't distinguish between the two. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're undocumented or you've been here for generations. You know, this rhetoric is, it's very troubling, and I think it causes harm in society as a whole.
Okay. So here's a companion question. Do you believe US-born Latinos, given their background, their experience, their ancestry, have any obligation to use their votes to object to policy actions implicating vulnerable populations like Latino immigrants? Examples: conditions at federal immigration detention centers where several young immigrant children have died, the forcible separation of immigrant mothers from their children, the deportation of Latino veterans that had served in US military branches with honor. Edgar, I'm gonna go to you for this one. What do you think? Any special obligation here for US-born Latinos to use their vote to object to these types of things?
Yeah, I'll differentiate my answer in terms of what I would hope and what I believe the reality is.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of, yeah, I do wish that us as a community would see some, you know, some of this, maybe not as obligation, but to look, you know, to see our vote as doing good for the greater whole, right? And you named a number of issues. Now, here's one of the challenges with even the statement that I made of hoping that we would make decisions for the community. And I think it's one of the challenges, and you know, this just in looking at political science, of clumping our Latino community as one homogeneous group is sometimes a challenge, as you talked about in your intro. It's because you see that it's very different, and even the driving influences of what is the factors. I think it was Toni was talking about the kitchen cabinet issues, and sometimes it's even hard to talk amongst ourselves. Even amongst us as a community, you see some of the exit polls or how even Latinos think about illegal immigration. It's a complicated story there, right? And I think we have to first acknowledge that before even moving forward on that bigger piece.
Illegal immigration, undocumented people, it doesn't follow along conventional political lines, right? So some of the most what I would characterize as fervent kind of anti-immigrant individuals that I've spoken to are Latino. And at the same time, I know dyed-in-the-wool Republicans who are out in the desert right now with immigration organizations putting out water in the desert so people don't die of thirst and exposure and crossing. So what do you think, Diana? Any special obligation here for US Latinos to look out for vulnerable populations like Latino immigrants, asylum seekers?
Yeah, I think, you know, Edgar touched on it a little bit. It's tough because voting is so much of your voice and what that stands for. For me, I think President Virjee said it really well, that you are, in a lot of ways, as a documented citizen, you have a certain kind of privilege, if you're going to look at it that way. And I think that we're being called, especially now in this time of a lot of injustices, to utilize that privilege for good. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, but what does that vote mean in the circumstance we're in today? And who's that vote speaking for? I know myself, I know plenty of undocumented citizens, and I'm seeing what's happening at the border, and I'm seeing what's happened to the Latino community disproportionately. And I do go into the voting booth thinking about how my vote is going to help people or hurt people. And I think that with that privilege, I'm keenly aware, especially now, what that can do and how that can change someone's life. And so for me, and I want to speak for myself on this, with that background, that I do feel there's a certain obligation for that. And I've always felt that obligation. ever since I was 18. And it sounds like most of us have felt that in some way or another. It just depends how you act on it. And that's how I would act on it. It's a great question.
So I'm going to circle back into voter education, given what we've just discussed. What roles can voter education in the U.S. Latino community play in building communities of interest or a critical mass of voters to express their voice when it comes to issues like that, which we have just discussed, by building bridges between itself and other communities of color and culture, the Asian American community, or perhaps the Black community? Because it does strike me that in all of my discussions, and this is an example, that the Black community doesn't know terribly much about the history, the culture, and the experience of US Latinos. And it's the same thing for US Latinos. They really don't know in depth, in great detail, about the history and the culture or experience of Black folks. And as a consequence, they both run the risk of buying into kind of prevailing societal prejudices, which tend to pit one community against the other. So how can voter education and participation help in building these communities of interest? Helen?
You know, I'm going to take this from another direction. First of all, let's just be very honest that the fact is, in the United States, no one knows their own history. Given people that, you know, have been here for, they consider centuries, which is sometimes impossible, they don't know their own history. So unfortunately, and there was just a couple of weeks ago that there was a poll of Gen Z that the majority of them couldn't define what the Holocaust was. So we're in a deficit mode when it comes to understanding history, the role that history plays. And because of that deficit, we're allowing other people to provide a narrative that we buy into. And that's what's so dangerous. And so what happens, how do we combat that? First of all, we have to own up the fact that our education system and how we show up to educate ourselves is very much lacking, especially when it comes to historical context and being inclusive of different voices in that historical context. Secondly, when it comes to voting, we know that what motivates people to vote is if they really feel that they have a stake in the game. And that's why you see homeowners and senior citizens as the two groups that come up the most, right? Because they don't want their property taxes go up. They have a stake in the game. Or if you're a senior citizen, you don't want Medicare and other services to go away. We have to give the youth a reason of why they have a stake in the game. And sometimes people will say, well, that's a real obvious reason, right? We can all name them off, but it doesn't motivate them enough. So first, we cannot rely on voter education to bring the bridge the historical fact or the lack of history knowledge that we have in this nation. That's a much bigger issue. We can rely on economic engines to help us bridge the gap in communities that we can come together and create jobs and create prosperity and create a better life for each of us. And that's how I think you get to this. I think you have to come at it from a place of a common goal, and that is to better each of our lives.
Antonia, what do you think?
The local side?
Yeah, sure.
I think so often we're so focused on federal politics and what's happening in Washington, D.C. And really what affects your daily life is your local cities. What is your city council deciding? And if we're going to talk about education, I can't tell you how many people think the mayor actually runs the city, and that me as a bureaucrat essentially are making policy decisions when that's not the case. So I think we need to also focus on educating our communities about how local government works and how you can have a voice and you can come to a council meeting and talk about whatever you want for 3 minutes. And really, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've thought that a council was going to make a decision on something and their vote is changed because of what they hear from the public at the dais. And so if we're going to talk about voter education, we really need to also talk about the effect of local politics. I mean, a person in a district, in a city council, can win with a couple hundred votes. And that's who's determining what parks get services, what roads get paved. And so I totally agree with Helen. And I would take it even further to say that we need to know our audience, know what our local communities need and want, and offer things like we do in Fullerton, like a citizen academy, and about how a local government works. And so I'll just throw my local government perspective in there.
Sure. Thank you. So we're coming up on the 6:30 mark here, and I know that we wanted to open it up for question and answers about 6:35. Let me finish off with this mini question here. What do you wish the Democratic Party knew and the Republican Party knew about U.S. Latinos and voting? Edgar, what say you?
I think we talked a little bit about it in terms of, and I'm glad that question is about what each party, in some ways, where sometimes the challenge about how heterogeneous our community is and how different it is, you know, that's usually leveraged in terms of why hasn't the Latino community been able to really exercise this political muscle that we've been talking now about for decades as our numbers grow and our percentages of those that are eligible, and that's a whole other story, right? Getting that nexus between the 80% that you say now are citizens to those numbers of how many are actually eligible to vote, how many are likely to vote, how many are actually coming out, right? Growing those numbers. But I think to your specific question in terms of what I hope they know, and if this is not being clear, I think every day, is that it's not one community and that there's different needs. That some of the things that folks are caring about, that yes, we care about what's happening at the border and with immigration, but we also need to know what is government going to do about health care, about as a homeowner, what is going to be the impact on me as taxes, essentially the why, right? Answering that. And I love what Toni had to say about the local, because I think this is the adage I get from your school board, city council, you know, all the way through that. Yeah, how is it that the things that you're going to talk about are going to impact my life on a day-to-day basis? And I think being able to answer that, I think, is key.
Diana, I saw you quickly unmute and then mute back, so I wanted to give you the closing word here.
I agree. I think both parties do, we've said it before, but they do lump all Latinos together, and we are so different and distinct. But not only that, you see this huge gap in interest and issues between Latino men and Latino women. They're not the same issues, and I know that there are a few studies out there that have seen this gap, and it's pretty significant with how Latina women are voting and how Latino men are voting. And I think that there needs to be a little bit more emphasis from each party to reach out uniquely to each gender. And in addition to that, I think that people forget that the Latino community is a community, and while we want to be treated, you know, in our own unique ways, we also are very open to strategies that revolve around community and making you feel like someone's picking up the phone and reminding you to register to vote, or coming to your door and knocking on your door. I can't tell you how many times that's swayed my family when we've actually met a candidate and they've made that extra effort to get to know you. We are relationship-based people, and I don't think that'll ever change. So the strategies might be able to affect all of us similarly when you're thinking about community, but making sure that both the Republican and Democrat Party are answering the unique needs of each of you know, the genders and each of the different Hispanic people that exist in their electorate. And I think that another interesting point is that Latino women are actually the ones who are starting to gather folks and organize people and get them to the polls. Our numbers mean nothing. It doesn't matter if we're the largest minority voting bloc. It doesn't matter that, you know, I think it's every 8 seconds there's 800 new Latino voters. That doesn't matter if we don't get to the polls. And representation is more than just the elected official. It's us representing ourselves at the voting polls and making those decisions and really showing our voice. And I hope we see that in 2020, because we are the largest minority voting bloc, and I want that to mean something with us showing up.
I want to ask, I'm going to get to a question from the audience, but I wanted to ask a follow-up based upon your comments, Diana, which were great comments, certainly. But the reality of the situation is that for large segments of the U.S. Latino population, they're either unemployed or underemployed, and you reference women. So how do you convince women who maybe have children to look after, have to string together 3 or 4 temporary part-time jobs, needs to feed these kids, perhaps need to take care of a sick mother who is diabetic and suffering from dementia? How do you convince them to carve time out of their schedule to vote?
The situation they're in right now is very similar to my situation. I'm one of 4 children. Both my parents worked. My grandma suffered from dementia. And my parents knew in order for us to get out of any situation that was unfavorable or not great for us, we had to make that change. We're hardworking people who make the difference when it counts. If you want to get out of that situation, it starts with voting, and it starts with changing your circumstance by electing the people who are going to understand what you're going through. There's not going to be you need a Latina woman to understand what a Latina woman's going through and what her family experience might be. So otherwise, you just might not know if it's somebody else who's being elected. So I think that now more than ever, it's important for us to get out there and make the changes we need in order to see that happen.
Helen, you have likely encountered this situation in your own leadership work.
So there's a couple of things that I could tell you about the Latina voter and how to ensure that they vote. You're absolutely right. The majority of Latinas make 42 cents on the dollar. They often have more than one job, and they're either taking care of their children or helping families somehow or another. I'm always struck by the young women that we serve at Hope, how many of them are more concerned about how their parents are doing than how they're doing with their own education, and struggling to make sure that their parents and their families are economically well off. So it's a very generous heart, if you will. So what do we know about Latina voters? First of all, Latina voters sometimes feel like they have to have a PhD to show up to vote because they want to get it right. They want to understand the issue inside and out. So my answer right now is, you're smart enough, you've already figured it out, just vote. Secondly, they like to vote in a community. So we did at Hope is we took a Latina voter pledge where we've asked every Latina that has taken this pledge to bring along another Latina with them. So doing it as comadres is a very effective way. And then third, and we're very lucky to be living in California for this, is that you can vote by mail. There's a variety of different ways now that you can vote, and it's much more accessible. The window to vote is a larger time frame, right? So you're gonna get your ballots October 5th, get them in early, go to your voter center, drop them off. If you don't want to mail them, you can drop them off, but vote. So there's a couple things. Increase your confidence because you already have it. Don't let that be a barrier. Vote with your friends and family. You're the number one person that can really influence Latinos and Latinas is the mother. They listen to their mothers on voting. And so that's tremendous, tremendous power. And be grateful that we have a system in California that provides you a variety of different opportunities to get your vote in. There is no excuse. The Latina that's making 42 cents on the hour is the voter. The only growth the Democratic Party has seen in California is because of young Latinas. That's the only reason they have any growth. So Latinas are voting. They're out there representing their communities. We can just do better, and we just got to make sure that we can be joined together in getting out the vote, regardless of party affiliation. But we're definitely a force to be reckoned with, especially here in California.
Given my professional background experience, people will oftentimes quiz me about, well, who do I think is the most influential and important people, expecting me to say, oh, a Supreme Court justice or the president or blah, blah, blah. I invariably answer mothers are the most powerful force on earth, because that is true. Before we get to the panelist questions, Antonia, I wanted to analogize and then localize the question that Diana and Helen just responded to, and that has to do with kind of community participation in local politics. You mentioned that there was a Spanish Academy or Spanish Citizens Academy that the city of Fullerton sponsors. Same question. I mean, how do you convince people that, particularly within the context of COVID-19, who are just struggling to ensure that they have food on the table at night for them and their kids, to participate in a city-sponsored Citizens Academy?
That's a great question, because we did an English Citizen Academy virtually on Zoom, and we decided that we needed to hold our Spanish Citizens Academy in person. We did it socially distanced in our library. It was done 100% in Spanish, and it focused on public safety, so police and fire, infrastructure, public works, and city management. So the city manager and one of our council members came and spoke. And we really believed that if we worked closely with a neighborhood, a very active neighborhood, and invited them personally, and because they are so involved in the community, that we really felt that we would get a good turnout, and we did. We had over 30 people attend, and we let them bring their children. And I think that speaking to the working mother, I mean, I'm a working mother. I also am a professor at Cal State Fullerton, so I balance all these different jobs. And yet, so I could understand the perspective of these moms that wanted to come. They're vested in the community. They want to learn more about how the city actually works. And we made it convenient for them. And if you are trying to engage the community, you have to make it convenient. And so we did it after work, and we allowed them to bring their children. And it was really successful for us, and we're definitely going to be doing it again.
Okay, so I'm going to get to a couple of questions here from the attendees to the panel. So the first question is, how do you recommend educating yourself on the candidates for local elected offices when there is often little prior public exposure of the values that they have and the mindset with which they will approach their role? Edgar, you want to take a stab at this one?
Yeah, this could be overwhelming, right? Because anybody, all you have to do is go to your mailbox and just see, at this time of year, how overwhelming it is with just the literature, and and if we rely on that's really some of the worst ways to make decisions. I mean, depending on your local community, there's usually organizations that'll try to just go nonpartisan, straight to the facts, the pros and the cons, for whether it be candidates or initiatives. I'm a big proponent, though, even in this COVID age where everything is technology, and if anything, it might make it more accessible, almost whether it be a candidate forum, hearing about what the person's about in their own words, right? Not relying on whether it be all the third party literature, but just really getting a chance to interact with candidates, especially at a local level. I mean, people think like those folks are so inaccessible, but when we're talking about local office, school board, those are probably some of the folks you can sit down, maybe not sit down these days, but have a conversation with and really find out what they're about.
I'm going to ping pong this back to Antonia, if you don't mind handling this question, because they reference local politics here. Essentially, if there's an absence of literature, information about how the candidate is going to approach their sought after elected position. What do you do?
I am a political science nerd and love elections. This is my favorite time of year. So I research every single candidate, even judges. I look and see their campaign finance forms. This might be a little advanced for just your average voter, but you can always go to your city clerk of your city and ask to see your the candidate statements of whoever is running. It's all on city websites. Also, who they get their money from. This is always fascinating to me because that's how they're going to vote.
Yeah.
And so if you see they're getting their money from California Apartment Association, they're most likely going to be pro high density development. If they get their money from Chevron, they're going to be pro, maybe not so pro environmental issues and reduction of greenhouse gases. So it's always really fascinating to see where they get their money. And then also who endorses them, because that's also a big indicator of maybe where their values are. And so depending on where your political party lies, that may sway you. And I think, now with district elections, you're really, especially in Fullerton, we have 3 council members up this year, three potential new council members. And so really getting to know the council member in your district and who's running against them. You could listen to on voter forums. They're all online right now. So you can just be in the comfort of your own home with your kids listening to a Zoom webinar. But your city website will have resources. And I don't think many people know that, to go and look at the candidate statements and see where they're getting their campaign donations from.
Okay. So next question from the audience to all the panelists. And I'm actually going to modify it. And I'm going to say, choose just one word, a one-word response to this question. And this goes out to each of you. So, what motivated you to do the work that you now do in your respective organizations? So just choose a word that's emblematic, that represents you and why you do what you do professionally.
I'll go. It's a word that always comes to mind. It's really kind of cheesy. Democracy. I believe in it 100%. I think that's the best form of government that we have, and we have to all participate in it.
Diana?
I would say advocacy. It sounds kind of generic, but it's what I'm passionate about doing for things that I care most about.
Okay. Antonia?
I would say community, because I think that's what motivates me to create better communities that are something that I can be proud of.
Edgar?
Growth or advancement. I mean, it's the nature of what education is, of just trying to better ourselves in our community.
Okay. All right. Next question. Given the large population of Hispanic/Latinx students at Cal State Fullerton, how can a professor approach the issue of voting that would entice students to take on the role of voter? I hope this isn't one of my students, right? But it makes me look totally unpassionate. But what do you think? Think back to your college days, and what would have gotten you at college age more invested in actually voting?
I'll take this one really quickly. I know as a college student, I had great professors. If Dr. Stanbaugh's out there, I hope you're listening. So many of our professors made our classroom experience interactive. So, and I was lucky enough to take a president and the presidency class. It's only obviously available every 4 years. And we had to track a candidate and follow them through, kind of like fantasy football. And that got everyone really excited because we had skin in the game, like Helen, I think, said. And it made us, keep on tabs on what was happening and listen to the news, listen to talk radio. And then we had big debate parties on campus, and we would all come together and discuss what each candidate was saying. And that made it fun and made it tangible and gave us something to really kind of connect to as college students. And then especially as Latino students, you know, doing things as a community and bringing people together is hugely important around food, around a table. Obviously, COVID's changed that, but I've seen a lot of great opportunities for Zoom voter forums and for, you know, Zoom communities where you kind of all watch together and it makes it more interesting. And I know that drive-ins are doing some pretty exciting stuff too. So I think that's helpful.
Diana, do you think that, and this is specific to you, do you think that your participation in the Cal State and DC program, where you got to really see the reality of how the nation's political machinery works at the highest decision-making levels, was influential as well in your own kind of investment in politics and political participation, advocacy?
Yeah, bar none. I mean, going to DC was hugely impactful to my career trajectory. It made me feel confident enough to apply for the Capital Fellows program, which I was accepted to upon graduation. It really set the tone for everything that I do now. And I think, you know, going back to Toni's point, what I wish I'd done was take a Dr. Sarah Hill class and learned about California politics a little bit more. Because I went into that, you know, going to Sacramento, working at the Capitol without not having a really strong background because I was so focused on the federal politics and how the federal government works. When really the state government is so impactful, and not only that, but get closer, local government, city council is just as impactful. So yes, DC was huge for me and probably the best decision I ever made at Cal State Fullerton. But second to that was understanding how impactful local government is.
Okay.
Do the DC Scholars Program, everybody. It's amazing. It's online this year.
Edgar, what do you think?
I just ditto to everything Diana said. I had similar experience to go back to Washington, D.C. I was also a fellow in Sacramento, got to work in the state capitol. And a shout out to my own professor, Dr. Sonnenschein, back in the day. He same thing. It was just about having those conversations, really applying what was in the news and in what was actually the news of the day and how that was impacting us as students. So it's not at that age in college, you don't often are sitting around in community having these deep conversations. And I think facilitating those type of environments to have that dialogue, I think was hugely impactful.
Okay. Antonia.
Well, I think I have maybe a different perspective. My dad at the time was dean at Cal State Fullerton and was very involved in local politics where I grew up in Claremont. And so this was something we always talked about. And so when I went to Cal State Fullerton, I took a class with Dr. Barbara Stone, a Sacramento policy class, and I had a class with Sonnenschein, and we talked a lot about the City of LA charter that he was working on. And these things really got me really interested. And so I went to intern for a congresswoman locally, and then I decided that I wanted to be in local government. So I think your professors can really get you interested in voting by talking about local issues, enticing you with something that matters to you to get you involved. I know I teach a 320 class and I'm teaching an environmental studies class right now. I tell my students, you know, watch a city council meeting, go to a city council meeting. And so you can understand how local government works. And when they start going to a council meeting and see an issue that means something to them, they become more of an activist, so to speak. And so that gets them more interested in voting for and really voicing their opinion through their vote.
Helen, how about you? Where does the rubber meet the road here? Where are students most likely to feel as if they have a stake here? You're in a university classroom. What does a professor do? I'm asking for advice here because
okay. Well, I think you got a lot of good advice. Make it interactive. I always, the number one way people get engaged in politics is actually through their family, right? That's the number one predictor of what partisan party you may belong to, how often you're going to vote is how your family votes and the values that your family has around voting. So, but with that said, of course, a professor is very important. I would always advise professors, to me, what I love about politics is about this incredible novella in which you can be an actor in, right? You are telling a story that is impacting everyone's life if it comes to how they're going to get their water delivered to their home, to the type of vehicle that they're going to get to drive, and or more pressing issues for a lot of young students that they report to, public safety issues, gun laws, gun reform, employment and what the economy is going to look like for them, the type of new jobs that they want to create. So for me, I always say the professors, and I know Dr. Sonnenschein well, he works a lot with the Hope Leadership Institute. They create this drama, this story in which at the center, you are the actor. You get to pick that path. And you get to know your mayor by the first name. And you get to know the context of how that person got there. I think that's really engaging. Politics at the end of the day is how we interact with each other, right? Is how we show up and say, this is how we're gonna, quite frankly, play, right? And some of us wanna cut through and break the rules, and other of us are there to say, no, we've gotta be fair in this. So, how are you involved in the drama and the novella of your life? And you can't escape politics. Even if you don't vote, you're going to be influenced by the decisions of others. So Dr. Castro, start weaving your novella, cast the characters, and engage your students.
So lots of government and private organizations, particularly advocacy groups, have really had to pivot and adapt hard within the context of COVID-19. So how has COVID-19 changed what you do professionally for each of you?
I'll jump in here because this is an unprecedented experience working in local government. We really had to change the way we deliver services to our community and deliver services to the most marginalized in our community, and make sure that we were providing services equally. We've utilized a translator more frequently. We have we are conducting our city council meetings in public. We have a different socially distanced setups. We have converted almost everything online. We're still open by appointment. Our library has had to change. Our parks and recreation programs have had to change. And so as local government professionals, we've had to rethink absolutely everything that we do to ensure that we're continuing to maintain city services while everything else is shut down. Our public works crews are still out there filling potholes and responding to sewer overflows. Our police are still working. Our firefighters are more exposed than ever. So we really have rethought absolutely everything. And I'm really proud to say that in the city of Fullerton, we continue to deliver services without really any major disruptions. And so it's really been a learning experience. I really think it's made us more adept with technology, but really it has made us more understanding of the needs of our community through our tenant-based rental assistance programs that we're offering, small business loan programs, all of these different things to really reach every facet of our community.
All right, I'm gonna go over to Diana, then Edgar, and then wrap it up with Helen.
Yeah, I think Toni definitely wins this one because I deal with local governments every day as a lobbyist for the Building Industry Association. I'm in city council offices every day via Zoom now. So my lobbying would be going to city council meetings, going to, nightly, whether it was in Ventura or in Los Angeles, or sometimes I'd be in two places at once. It's helped me immensely because now I can be in two places at once, having two different virtual screens open. And it's helped with telecommuting a lot, which has had a lot of great positive outcomes for so many who are dealing with children or working from home, and for folks who, or even for the environment. So, my entire job has changed. We actually got rid of our offices, so we don't even have an office. We're 100% working from home because we just don't see the need for it in the foreseeable future. In LA County and in Ventura County, most of it, all of the local government offices are closed to the public, with very few, if any, exceptions. And the hardest thing for us was making sure that cities did stay open and essential for building and construction of residential development. We were on the phone with the governor's office, with Eric Garcetti's office, with Catherine Barger's office to make sure that building continued despite the difficulty that COVID brought on, because we were already in a housing crisis, and we wanted to make sure that anything that would keep that keep us further in a crisis was averted. And I think we were able to do that with the partnership of cities. So everything has changed for us.
Edgar?
Likewise. Well, in addition to doing most of my meetings in workout shorts, this has changed pretty much every aspect of life. You know, just like the lady said, just being virtual it's forced us to be smarter and be more efficient. And what is the things that really need attention and resources? I spend most of my days trying to support school leaders across the state. And people have asked, well, what have you been doing the last couple of months? Really become a translator to what was coming out from the state, from the governor's daily press conferences. No one knew what the job of the public health officer was before all of this. You know, really just thinking about how everything coming from the state, from local government, is impacting, in this case, families, schools, our ability to provide in-person or distance learning to our students. But I think at the end of the day, it's just being creative in how we do the work that we used to do.
And then finally, Helen.
Well, I'll piggyback on what Edgar said about being creative. Innovation is definitely what we've had to employ 100%. We're a small nonprofit. We do most of our programming statewide. This has impacted us tremendously. We pride ourselves as being a high touch organization where we meet our Latinas where they're at, right? So we travel a lot across the state. We have convenings that are small, or, you know, from like 10 groups of 10 Latinas to sometimes 1,000 in Los Angeles. So this has impacted us. What we first did was we really sat down as a team, as a staff, through Zoom, and it said, let's divide the list. We know who have gone through our leadership program. Let's start connecting with them. Let's just check in with our Latina leaders and see how they're doing. How are they coping, and what do they need from Hope? So from that, we started just reinventing all our programming and knowing that we had to be there for Latina leaders. If it looked like additional types of training, how do you conduct a Zoom call? How do you lobby during this time? To how do you start organizing and get out the vote efforts? So we're constantly pivoting to the needs of the women that we serve. We've been very fortunate that of the 4 leadership programs that we run, 3 of them we were 100% able to do virtually. And from our high school students and our college students, they were hungry to continue, because this was one of the few times that they were able to get together with their peers in a very active way civically. So I feel we did a really good job of being a resource for our Latina leaders that were held a horrible set of circumstances of leading during this time, right? As well as being there to ensure our high school and college students were meeting not only what they needed to get done for the year for, last school year graduation in college, but to get them prepared for how do you even interview during this time of COVID? How do you look for a job? So I'm proud of our team. We're a small and mighty team, and I think we constantly just ask the question, how are we showing up for the Latinas that we serve?
All right, well, listen, we are at the 7 o'clock hour, folks, so I wanted to extend my great thanks to all of our panelists. Thank you for such a thought-provoking and enriching discussion. Thank you to our president for carving out time out of your busy schedule to attend, and thank the audience. Thank you to the audience. My thanks for your questions and your interest, and I bid you all a safe good night, and also a healthy one as well. Take care, everyone.